not least from CIDB South Africa, or Construction Industry Development Board South Africa, Mr. Bongani Tlatla, who is the CEO there as well. So on that note, starting with Lisa, maybe I can just ask you to kick us off and tell us about the Green Building Council of South Africa. You know, what you advocate for sustainable building practices, what you actually do as the CEO and your company as well.
Well, again, I think that's a huge question. So the Green Building Council, our vision is to transform a built environment in which people and planet thrive. So what that means really, and there's a bit of a misnomer because we call it the Green Building Council, but we look at the built environment. And people would say to me, well, you're the Green Building Council, why are you at an infrastructure symposium? And the reason is because we have to look at greening and sustainability holistically. If you take it, who of you have driven in Sandton? Sandton's probably got the most green accredited buildings in blocks, but would anybody call Sandton a green precinct? No, because it's not, it's great. Each project is green, but when you look at it holistically, it's not. And that's really where we feel that we can play a huge role. And where we talk about innovation, it's innovation in solutions. If we're looking at greening the infrastructure, we know as a country we're moving away from just coal-fired energy. So I'm just using energy as an example. And we're going to a different mix. What does the infrastructure look like for a different mix of energy? Is it the same as the one we've got? And I would say no. And that's where the innovation comes in. It comes in the planning, in looking at how we're doing things. I mean, the SEZ were here before, and again, it's a holistic approach to greening. It's not building by building. It's everything. And a lot, you know, the most green you'll get is if you plan green, if you plan for sustainability, and it starts at infrastructure.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, take into account now what we heard from Lisa, Chris. Maybe from your side, it will be interesting to know from Consulting Engineers South Africa, you know, the pivotal role that you play in shaping the industry and the standards and practices in essence. What initiatives is your organization undertaking to promote innovation and digitalization as well within the construction sector?
Well, thanks, Alvino. And I think, firstly, for those who are not familiar with the organization from which I hail, we are Consulting Engineers South Africa. We've been around for 72 years. Probably have about 600 member companies countrywide, and provide best practice consulting engineering services in just about all of the disciplines of engineering, but sometimes include architecture and quantity surveying services as well. And integral to the solutions that are provided by our member companies are indeed looking at and innovating on how might you improve the efficiencies in all of these processes. If we talk about greening, then are the opportunities for circular economy in construction and the construction materials environment that one could advocate for. Obviously, we don't build the stuff, but if there's best practice that we can learn from, then certainly that's what we should be looking at. And in the process itself, in respect of the construction and digital pursuits, there's a plethora of technologies currently available. You know, I'm always mindful of the fact that these are all great things, but as a country, we need to up our game in terms of our education levels afforded to more of our young people so that we don't lock them out of these future world opportunities. For example, back in the day, you could be a draftsman and you drew by hand. These days, you need to be much more tech savvy. And you know, when we talk about construction, think about the construction labor. 3D printed houses, that can be done. I saw a demo at, I think it was UJ campus. You can do that on scale, you know, but you're going to have to retrain those people who were the bricklayers, or, you know, to be mixing What is the technology involved in the 3D printing materials? Drone technology, your land surveying. You don't need a guy to be running around with a staff or anything anymore. You can sit remotely and you can do an aerial survey. And so there's a whole host of reskilling, site supervision. In fact, the technology that's available there even is, if you took a traditional consulting engineering company who would need to do site supervision, you don't need to have a whole team of people going to go and see if the reinforced concrete is all properly according to the drawings. You need one person there. And they have a whole digital twinning environment, and you can visually, from the office, see what that person is seeing and direct them. And then, you know, there's a host of other technologies. Augmented reality, BIM. In fact, augmented reality, if I may add there, is often, you know, back in the day, you'd have construction drawings, and there could be some errors or things that are not quite practical from a construction perspective. You can preempt that now by using augmented reality even before the structure has been put up, rather than have the contractor standing because maybe the bolts are not adequately spaced and you can't get a wrench in to tighten a bolt for a column. You know, so those are at a really basic level, the technologies that could be used to make your construction processes a lot more efficient. And then finally, maybe I'd like to add on the fact that one of the key issues around managing the construction is record keeping. A site diary should be redundant. You can have virtual site diaries. You use blockchain, your payment certificates, your all of the above, and you can then tie down the opportunities often that get used for fraudulent activity in these environments. So, yeah, let me stop there.
Thank you. No, thank you for that. And that's well, some of the innovation is coming along. And now going to the other engineer on the other side of the table as well on the other side of the row. What strategies does the CIDB then, you know, would consider when it employ the support to the integration of digital technologies and innovation into construction practices? I mean, CIDB, there's usually a lot of expectation coming from your side in terms of new innovative thinking as well.
Yeah, the CIDB as a regulator, which also has a mandate to develop the construction industry, there are quite a few things that are important for the CIDB, and I think the CIDB and very few other stakeholders can make a meaningful contribution too. As the CIDB, in providing the leadership, the improvement, the best practice to the industry, we can also write standards. For instance, Chris is talking about BIM, for instance, which is a wonderful tool to be able to run your construction project from design to construction, and will lead to these other ambitious targets like smart cities and all that. But you need a country standard that engineers can work to, and many other stakeholders. So the CIDB, within its mandate, can provide those, and we've written the roadmap, for instance, for the country when it comes to how do we get to BIM level 2, level 3, because right now when you're looking at building information management or better information management, we are currently at level 1, where it's pretty much chaotic. Everyone is doing their own things in their various steps, and it's based on clients' expectation and needs. But the CIDP 1 has that mandate to put out standards. You know, we have sent standards on BIM, but we need annexures that will be applicable to all the sectors of the built environment. So that's number one, and I think it's a unique position that the CIDB will provide and should provide leadership in. Because at the basic level, you need to have standards so that everyone knows what is the expectation. We can also prescribe as a regulator as to which projects we should be starting with when it comes to some of these. But the other aspects, because the CIDP also has a developmental element, we should also be creating the human capital and assisting the industry to transform towards that. So one, with basic research that we do through our centers of excellence, but number two, where we also do advocacy work. For instance, currently we are supporting the BRICS World Skills Challenges, around developing of the BIM curricula, and also getting our students and our professionals involved in the BIM communities through competitions and others, so that we can also start instilling the right culture of using 4IR and not only leaving the burden to employers in order to train. So it's both on the regulatory front, where we can drop standards and publish those, but also on the developmental aspect, where we can also provide the space for training, development, and the advocacy work to ensure that at least the basic building blocks like BIM, like blockchain, we can provide training in that. So it's sort of a dual role that we can play on that front.
But let's touch on that, right? The regulatory environment is not so open as yet around these items and around these issues.
Yes.
We don't have the politician here in the room now to help us in terms of answering that question. But I mean, how would you say, how can government policies be shaped to actually incentivize private sector investment in digital infrastructure more, and construction projects specifically, especially in regions with historical disparities?
Yeah. Well, the first aspect is that you need a public service that is very much attuned to be able to be able to accept alternative bids, for instance. Basically, each and every time. You can have colleagues that will say, I can do a 3D printed house cheaper and faster than a brick and mortar. But if the tender document is going to come out and saying, you have to build me a brick and mortar RTP house, no alternative bids are allowed or alternative solutions. But that requires a far more informed client to be able to understand the not building infrastructure for the sake of infrastructure, but looking at the functionality of it thereafter. So it's quite important that we don't lock ourselves. It's not illegal, but you just need a far more informed client to looking at that, you know. We once looked at a project where someone was saying they need a treatment plant, but they also need biofuels at at one of the municipalities. But again, the proposals that were combining both into one, which is one of the key sustainability principles, multifunctionality of infrastructure, were discarded because we are still looking at it. It's a treatment plant. Another one is an energy project. So we sort of need, and I think many, SIDSSA, CIDP, and many others can provide a lot of capacity building on how do we procure for sustainability, how do we procure for innovation. You go to places like Silicon Cape or Chimologong, you see wonderful ideas like analytical data analytics used in pressure pipes to reduce leaks. But when it comes to the procurement process, then it becomes a stumbling block because the municipality will be asking for, we need to reline this pipe or change this pipe, not looking at saying we need to reduce leaks, because it's a totally different problem if you phrase it like we need to reduce leaks than to saying I need a 5 millimeter PVC pipeline, blah, blah, blah. It's a totally different. So we have a long way where we can get there because I believe they are smart enough engineers as long as they get involved in the procurement process meaningfully, that we can solve some of these challenges. But a lot of it gets lost at the point of procurement.
I see, Chris, you feel like you want to come in here and say something as well on this.
Yeah, look, I think I fully support what Bongani is saying, but I think there's room for standards and standardizing because, you know, it's great to have innovative solutions, but if they vary too much, then you've got to think of who's going to maintain all of this, these varieties. And I mean, if you look at one of the biggest issues we struggle with in the construction industry at the moment is quality of cement. Locally manufactured, there's so much that you can buy in bags that's imported, which doesn't conform to a quality and a standard that we prescribe. And one has to be careful to, you know, have too many variations without having some kind of standard of uniformity that future generations of infrastructure owners may be saddled with and just be totally dependent on the originator of that, which you don't want. You want to be able to, you know, take over and take responsibility and maintain it going forward. So I think it's a crucial consideration in that process.
Lisa?
Yeah, I can see someone wanting to add something. And I think, just back to Bongani's point, I think, it's, when we look, and I'll relate, back to the Green Building Council, and when we look at, say we certify a building or precinct, one of the fundamentals we have to do is get everybody involved in that building to understand how that building works. It's not about training them on what makes green, but it's almost how to live in this green building. And it's similar to what you're saying, is that you have to get more, it's more than just passing on technology to people to implement. It's also passing on to stakeholders who don't necessarily implement it, but they need to understand it and understand where it's taking you to be meaningful. And sustainability's got many meanings, and sustainability of the technology often falls to all stakeholders understanding what this brings and why you've put it in. Too often I think people look at things and they go, "Oh, you're adding to my job." And when you say, no, I'm making your job better. But it's, how are you making my job better? This is how. And that's really, it's sort of getting buy-in from everybody. And I mean, I do agree with you with standards. I wrote lots of standards in my life. But it's just that one step further. And, you talk about sort of alternative building technology. Wait till you try and get a bonded building that's made of alternative building technology and speak to banks about giving you a mortgage. So all of it is a lot of education around it. But what I wanted to add as well is we need to get the basics right so that we can, really grow and go into where technology can help people.
And that's exactly going into those unreserved areas, right? So the under-reserved areas. The question is, how do you, it's easy maybe to pilot these new technologies in your city areas, in your metros, but how do you go into the more remote under-reserved areas, pilot it in those areas, and actually get the people's buy-in to say, look, this is a better option than your normal brick and etc. options that you're following, because usually that is the best way that they get paid. They get jobs through as well. This one now seems just a quick and easy way to get me maybe just a good house in the process. How do you actually get to that point of motivating those in the rural, unreserved areas as well?
Well, I'll go back to Chris around standards, and then I'll come back to that question. Chris, in the opening, you mentioned, for instance, things like drone technology. If you look at the project that the president was talking about, Valhamahara, which was probably a 90-kilometer length project where, without a doubt, you will do a better job in terms of site supervision by having drones than having site agents that will pass here and then will come after 6 hours, well, not site agents as such, but inspectors and even in security aspect. But if the bill comes out saying we are looking in this project, the consulting engineer must provide 2 warm bodies too, then it takes away that opportunity for us to be able to look at what is it that these people are supposed to be doing as compared to the job itself, as compared to the warm bodies. And so I think we need to balance that off, and it's a balancing act, it's true, but we need to balance it and accept that in some areas we will fail, but it provides lessons for the next project, But on your question precisely, in terms of in the remote areas, I believe we have enough institutions that can provide that sort of assurance as to what is best for that particular. We might not start with 1,000 alternative building technologies, but those 5 that have gone through Agrima SA or the CSIR and others, those we should be able to, pilot and see, because some of them will actually be designed precisely for remote areas, for instance. And in terms of, even I was a water engineer before, a lot of technology, whether it's Decremont and others, came through as new technology, where there's a lot of skepticism, but they've become mainstream. And many will fall away because we think that they are the it, but afterwards. So I think another massive challenge that we suffer from is this thing of being afraid to fail, and when we fail in a specific, it looks like someone has done something wrong. Where's your PI insurance? Or, that sort of thing. So, and if we take that approach, then we'll still be stuck with brick and mortar, whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense for another 200 years to come. But I don't know, Chris might have solutions as to how do we get engineers not to be afraid to fail forward.
We wait to your answer.
You're putting me on the line here. Look, let me just say this. Fundamental to the training in engineers is it's a simple adage, and the best I can use is a bridge. Engineers are trained not to make a bridge stand up. They're trained to make it not fall down. And that's a completely fundamental shift in the thinking, because if you look at the consequences of that happening is loss of life and loads of money. So that's where you will not find engineers shooting from the hip where there's mission critical output required. I mean, simple other, I think I'm reminded of when we had these significant floods in KZN. There was a dam which had a metal plate for a weir, and most people as laymen thought the dam was failing. And lo and behold, there was a deliberate failure plate built into that system to exactly protect against the overstressing of the dam wall, which if that failed would be consequential. So there's a lot of preemptive thinking involved, and I just think it's just not possible to contemplate that you would deliberately design something and say, well, okay, we can afford to lose a few lives, or we can afford to waste a couple of millions of rands. So I think therein lies the challenge, and I think it's more than just about PI. You'll go to jail if people get killed.
Yeah. Lisa, just to go back to the Green Building Council for a second, and I'm just wondering if if we encourage the adoption of this digital technology and innovation in the construction sector, while ensuring environmental and social responsibility as well. How do we go about that? That is something you will obviously advocate for, but what will be the steps to get there?
I think the biggest thing is we look at where we can, what we call passive design. So it's where you don't turn anything off. So the easiest, and we talk about things that are adopted, the easiest example is motion sensor lighting. So we're saying put energy efficient lighting in, but now people still have to remember to turn it off. And now we're saying, no, technology said we can turn it off for you. And so that's a simple example where you're saying, if we can, they say the biggest energy saver, the biggest water saver. Okay, let me put it out to the audience. What do you think is the biggest initiative you can take to save energy and water? Any answers? Anything. There's no stupid answers, please. Okay. The biggest thing you can do to save energy and water is change people's habits. What's the hardest thing in life to do?
Exactly.
Yes. So where technology and the sort of comes in is where you don't have to rely on people's habits to get things done. And so it's the simplest example I can give you of
Yes.
where it really helps. And the other thing is, there's that old saying, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. It's true through all aspects of life. And it's true, if you don't understand how much energy, how much water, how much waste you've got, if you don't know how much it is, how can you manage it to be less? And that's where also these kind of things come in, and they really help. And again, you don't need somebody going to read meters. Technology says I can sit behind my computer and all of these things are connected and I can see, and you can do it on a housing level as well.
Yeah.
If everybody's connected in a township, you can say, how much energy is everybody using? And it's on your computer. So your energy management is there, and your water management.
So who's going to take the responsibility, the accountability in the measurement, in the monitoring of these processes?
Look, one of the things I've found is that one of the best energy savers I've seen in the residential sector is prepaid meters. Because nobody monitors their own spending, like people seeing that meter running when they put too many things on at the same time. It's bringing that to the fore, because again, it's nice to say, okay, municipality, you're responsible for this. But again, somehow you must bring the people using the stuff
Yes.
into that accountability. I don't have all the solutions,
We all don't.
but I think if you can sort of look at that kind of thing, it really, really does help.
Okay. Do we have some questions from the floor? I'm not sure if there's a roving mic. Anyone, if there's any questions from the floor, we'll open it up for any specific questions. No, but I think everybody is just enjoying the discussion.
Yes,
Is there
a
one?
question. Yes.
Oh, we have one.
Thank you very much. Good day, everyone. My name is Katla Hongkomo. I am an architect. So I wanted to ask, with the sustainable infrastructure, you know, this whole symposium process, we're speaking about digital infrastructure. And in terms of green building and engineering and construction, in a previous talk we had, they had mentioned the importance of creating digital infrastructure that monitors the way buildings behave and the way people move and behave in buildings, around the buildings, which is basically what infrastructure is. It's for people. So I wanted to know if I'm not sure who the question is directed to, but I think it's important to incorporate these digital twins, right? And a lot of educational institutions are already doing that in isolation. So are there plans or existing relationships with higher education institutions which are currently, you know, investing to some level on these digital infrastructures like twin cities, like BIM technology, and actually modeling the existing space as it is, so that when development happens and your Green Building Council comes in and they need accreditation, the town as it is currently has already been modeled. So when we design a new building, it fits into the existing infrastructure in a digital space. So yeah, I think the question is really about what collaboration exists currently, and are there plans to collaborate with institutions doing it? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Fiso. I think for me, just a question around how do we balance in terms of primarily, because if you know South Africa, I think the president did indicate that construction currently absorb about 1.2 million of our workforce. We're bringing in technology into the fore. How then do we balance that particular aspect? I think Chris did indicate about retraining. But I think as well, we also need to be mindful of the fact that we tend to use construction as one of our labor activation programs, and I think SIDSSA wrote even a standard in that particular aspect. So how then do we balance that particular aspect? And then, of course, CEO, I'm from the CITP. I think there was a question in terms of the collaborations between institutions, and I think in the room we do have Prof. Clinton from University of Johannesburg, who might also give indication on the collaboration, primarily in the introduction of the BEAM subject with government as well.
I'll take a final one, and then we'll do another round. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Andani. My question really follows the previous colleague over here. We were in the BIM conference with the CEO of the CIDB in the last week. However, my question aligns with the building information modeling in terms of the ECSA as an entity, the Green Building South Africa as an entity, as well as the CIDB. How fast or how quick do you believe we need to promulgate or adopt and take up such tools as building information modeling within your entities, and what is it that you are moving or adopting, and how fast or how quick can we? Because we've spoken about our deteriorating infrastructure in terms of maintenance, and my CEO would indicate we were in a conference where the people that are there have literally brought themselves there. It's not the ECSA that has sent candidates there. It's not the Green Building that has sent candidates there. So I just want to understand from your side in terms of the adaptation and how quick do you believe we need to?
Okay. Shall we start with the CIDB?
Why?
It felt like it was the question.
Katlego, yes, in terms of the collaboration with the universities, it does exist from the CIDB perspective through the centers of excellence where the fundamental research can be done, but we also have to collaborate broader, and I'm sure Prof. Clint can also come in on those collaborations around with higher education institutions. But you also need to collaborate with industry, because the higher education institutions will do the fundamental research, but there's also other consultancy type of work in terms of like drawing up the roadmap and having industry contribute towards the drafting of standards. And that's the stage that we are at when it comes to standardization for BIM. There is a roadmap that highlights in terms of what needs to happen in education, in higher education. Then we need a curricula for that. Hence, again, the partnership that the CIDP has with the BRICS Future Skills program, where we are trying to develop the curricula for the country that will cater to TVET college learners and university students so that we can make the transition to BIM much more easier. But again, collaboration is required also for other, and quite a number of books also and papers have been published on that, looking specifically in the South African construction industry as to what are the opportunities, the maturity levels, and the pathway towards getting South Africa towards a more digitally savvy environment. And colleagues, we will never be able to talk of digital twins. You can do it for your own single building or your own single piece of infrastructure. But if you don't have the standards, your BIM standards correct, those things will not be able to talk to each other. And then it becomes that BIM level 1 where it's a bit chaotic. Everyone is doing their own thing. You are using the UK standards, and you're someone else because they are based working with colleagues elsewhere. So it's quite important to have standards. And also then you can get fuller, more meaningful data collection and making good use of that data. It's quite important for that, the data to be produced, but it must be in a format that is usable to others. But I'm sure Prof will also come in around collaborations, and also as a leader in higher education, he can also probably also have a view as to how collaboration could also be better. Yes, in terms of the how fast we need to move in terms of from Andani, in my view is that we probably have to do in 5 years what other economies took 25 years to do, because for instance, when you talk of BIM now in the UK, they look at you like you are crazy. Because something they've been doing for the past 25 years, to them it's just a standard way of working. You know, when you do projects with colleagues in Saudi Arabia and you're saying, yeah, we are introducing BIM as an innovation, they look at you like, it's like you are saying you've discovered fire. You know, it's something so old to them. But again, us as a country, I think we need to do probably reasonably in the next 5 years what others have done over 20, and it's highly possible. And that's what our roadmap says, to move from level 1 to level 2, looking at the current maturity level of our industry, probably 3 to 5 years, having developed them. Because there are many people that are actually quite proficient, but they are just doing it on their own in their small consulting businesses, and it doesn't translate for use by the client and all that. So it doesn't become a collaborative platform. So but personally, I would think 3 to 5 years would be a reasonable pace to move from level 1 to 2, but Prof and other colleagues can have a view here. The second question, how do we balance? Oh, from SFISO. Yes, you know, SFISO, there is you read Prof's book that is coming up on reskilling. That's number one. Number two, yes, you know, when you look at sustainable development and technology, you have to balance the three principles: the societal impact of what we are doing, economic, and then environmental. If we are building a bridge, for instance, in a rural area, the correct thing for sustainable development is to use labor-intensive construction methods, of which we should support, because there you are dealing with high unemployment in most cases, so these jobs become very meaningful jobs. But if you are fixing a sinkhole in the middle of Sentin, use technology as much as possible, because we are disrupting totally the economy. But what most stakeholders fail to do is to balance the three aspects of sustainable development. And there are many methods that I hope will be mainstreamed one day, as to if we are looking at, okay, how much are you willing to suffer economically so that you can create those jobs, or in terms of time. The environment, don't touch that part, you know, it's paramount. But there are ways of assessing that. And also, it's just normal that jobs become relatively redundant over time. But what we must be good at is understanding the future skills, align our curricula and the trainings that we provide to cater for that, of which, as the construction industry, we are not doing totally bad, but we are also not in the forefront of the reskilling aspect. Chris was talking about the way that we take quantities now on site after an excavation. That is with drone technology, simple drone technology. Some jobs will become redundant. You know, there are many technologies that are just changing the way that we live, and we just need to adapt with it. We can't fight technology. We really can't, in my view.
But that is where the reskilling comes in, right? We need to
yeah,
adapt to our
reskilling.
current situation. I mean,
Yeah.
SIDSSA gave us a whole speech on Sunday, the masterclass of all the skill gaps, etc. But if we want to go into the space of technology innovation in the construction sector, we need to start to reskill our people to actually adapt to where we want to go to as well.
Imagine journalists complaining about ChatGPT and what it's doing to their
Yes.
job. It's a battle that you will never win, because it's just coming. You know?
That's correct. Chris, from your side?
You know, I always enjoy these discussions around reskilling. Now, so reskilling implies that you've got a targeted group. I think there's a lot more that we need to do, is to be a lot more future thinking. Because as we speak, we are setting up a whole generation of young people whom 30 years from now we want to reskill, because we didn't give them the right foundation to be able to deal with these future world types of skills that are going to be required. You know, and often that becomes the elephant in the room conversation. Is the quality of our basic education system equipping our youth for the future world of technology? We can tweak those who are already in that environment and that space, but that's not enough people. We need to look at more holistically and systemically, and then look at how might we build the foundation for the future as well. Long after, I think many of us have become part of the ether. You know, so it's great for the now, but I think that more should be done to make sure that we don't have to have these discussions about how we need to upskill. I mean, just to give you a classical example of upskilling. 1993, I was in the US, I was studying in the US, and then already I could go to a petrol pump and swipe my card at the filling station. We still have pump attendants. Why? Because we need to keep people employed. And that's, I mean, this is now several years later, and we still have in that situation. So we do run the risk of having these two worlds. And we need to bring these two worlds together so that there's a balance, and not create a world in the future that our current generation, all young kids, don't have access to.
Lisa?
Well, first I want to say, please don't upskill the pump attendants yet, because I don't know if I can fill my own fuel. So I'm very grateful for all my pump attendants. I get really lost when I go overseas, I must tell you, it scares me. But besides that...
We'll reskill you.
I'm the one that has to be
Reskill
reskilled.
you.
We'll have to reskill a whole lot of people. But what I wanted to say is one of the things that I've also noticed is in a lot of these things, whether it be infrastructure, SEZs, whatever projects, even projects, we treat them like projects. I think we should treat them like a step that you get learnings from and you take it to the next step. And where that falls in is that I think we fall down a lot on maintenance of these projects. If you go to, well, let me give you two examples. One, there was a solar-powered plant put into a rural area. The project went in, fantastic, solar power to everybody. But what they didn't skill anybody in is maintenance of this PV panel energy generator. You go to that village now, and you say, how are these panels? And the ladies say, it's the best wash lines I've ever had. They really dry the clothes well, because nobody's kept it up to date. Go to Alex, where all the solar water heaters were put in. How many of them are still working? Because again, part of the project didn't take into account how do we maintain this. And that's where you get local people that can be upskilled. And I know it's not technology, but well, it's one step further from what they used to have. But if we don't put those skills in, where we're saying, this is what we've got, whether it be BIM and training people how to use it, whether it be putting in different technologies and training people just how to maintain it. And I think there's such an opportunity for jobs in the maintenance of these things. And not just taking a project saying there, it's often funded, I've done the project, off the funders go, and what does it give people at the end of the day if they don't know how to keep it running? And and all those things must go into the learnings of how we do the next ones.
I reckon for me the question is also, it goes back to the initial question I had in terms of, what is the regulatory framework around this? What policy needs to be adopted for it to actually be implemented? Is it a public sector responsibility from a digital innovation perspective? Because when it comes to digital innovation, they will always say, this is a private sector issue. It's not us. But the need in terms of delivery is sitting on the public sector side. So it's a lot of questions I'm throwing you at once, just to see, what's your thinking around this, because that's the questions, public sector, and who's going to be responsible? Is it DPWI? Who needs to actually run with these types of projects or programs?
Well, from the regulatory perspective, I don't think there are too many limitations. There could be incentives that could be put in to accelerate us in that direction. But these things will be driven by the market. For instance, like what I was saying as a limitation, for instance, earlier on, to saying, if someone is saying, if the guys at UJ are saying now we can build an RDP house faster, cheaper, and it's still comfortable and all that, and we can do it at a competitive rate, if we are creative enough in our procurement processes, we should be allowing for that. looking for what is the end product, what am I looking for, not the method to saying I need 15 bricks and so many bags of cement. So that sometimes in practice, I see it sometimes as a limitation to saying we are so rigid around the procurement processes. But I don't think we have enough tax credits to sort of
consider it.
really move the needle in terms of saying green buildings that are doing X, Y, and Z. I encourage, because at the end of the day, when you are not doing the right thing now, I'm a student of sustainability, it will cost you one way or the other. It's actually more expensive, contrary to popular belief. Are we recording? Is that, no.
Yes, you are.
I'll leave that.
No career limiting statements here.
Yeah, you know, so there is the externalities when it comes to some of the options we choose. We don't price those correctly. You know, what example can I make? You will pay for it. If you do something now, you will pay for it with hospital bills or a shorter life expectancy and all that. So what I'm saying is that I believe in STM, that is the most difficult job there is in most environments. And that's where it really needs to be skilled, so that you can be able to assess and all these options that are being proposed, apples for apples, at a pace that is acceptable to industry and other stakeholders, so that we are able to move a needle forward. I'll find the examples once you've turned off the camera.
Lisa, what's your thoughts?
Look, I think so just for those of you who don't know, I was very involved in writing standards. And I was from the public sector, the private sector at the time. So I think it's a combination, because again, technology is a private sector thing, but you have to have a champion with you. So for instance, I was involved in writing energy efficiency standards for buildings. But at the time, it was still a DOE, it wasn't even DMRE, had a energy efficiency strategy. I went to them and I said, well, how are you going to achieve this? And it was like through standards. And we were like, okay, well, let's get the right people around a standards writing table to do it. And then we ended up writing I was on the advisory committee for the regulation as well, writing the regulation and honing the standard as a parallel process. Because if you know what's needed and you know what's out there, it's a partnership. Because, you know, you do have people wanting to sell the technology, but again, when you do the standards writing process, there are checks and balances to make sure that nobody's vested interest comes through in that, and it's good for the country at the end of it. But you have to have this mix of a public sector support with private sector sort of saying, I'm going to put some sweat equity into this.
Okay, Chris?
Sorry, there's some comments from Prof that he would like to share.
Okay, let's get some comments. I can't see that side.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to make a contribution. I think the CEO has actually said everything, but just to say that it does take a little bit of time for some of these things we're talking about to materialize, like what Chris was saying. If you look at where we are at the moment in South Africa, it took us over 3-4 years through CIDB funded support for the Center of Excellence to actually be able to create, do a research on the BEAM maturity models and to be able to place South Africa where we are, and also to develop the BEAM roadmap. And I think my view is that when it comes to BEAM generally, that government still needs to take the lead, considering that they are the biggest financiers of projects, and considering what CIDB is currently doing at the moment, it will really be proper in terms of when we conclude some of the studies we're currently working with them. Sometimes last year we kind of checked the perception of the professionals to look at where the professionals are in terms of the uptake of BEAM. And it was very overwhelming to see that the private sector is really ready for it, and even some government projects at the moment, the professionals are kind of really introducing it in an indiscriminate manner. At the moment, the study we're currently working on with the CIDB through the Center of Excellence is looking at the client perception to know the readiness of the client's entities in terms of readiness for BIM. But overall, I just want to say that when it comes to digital technologies, in terms of the curriculation, like the CEO was talking about, the digital environment curriculum at the moment is something that needs a very good discussion, because like what was the comment that was made now, if you look at what we are currently, what is being taught and where the world is going to 30 years from now, to say, are we actually, I was going to say, skilling the student in the right way? Are we teaching them about digital twin, about building information modeling, talking about cyber-physical system? Because we can talk about those things, but the question is, do we have a good ecosystem, even from the high school down to the universities? Because most of the advanced world, like Hong Kong and all that, they have gone on into this level in terms of maintenance. Even the bridges and the roads that we have, we're talking about condition maintenance. So overall, there needs to be a discussion in terms of the curriculum that is being run at the moment to actually be able to look at how to kind of really be able to ensure that it works well. But overall, CIDB provides very good support in terms of looking at these digital technologies, which we are working on in UJ, and I think we'll have opportunity in the future to make presentation about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Do we have a good ecosystem for this? Do you want to respond to Prof as well?
Yeah, I think, you know, if I just take us back to the fundamentals and I look at what this conference is all about, sustainable infrastructure development. What's missing, and I think you alluded to it, Bongani, you mentioned the three-letter word, SCM, supply chain management, if that's correct. We are missing the view of life cycle ownership of these assets that we develop. For the longest of times, we've assumed that you're buying something off the shelf that's a consumable and it's a commodity. And most often, it starts with a consulting engineering company or one of your built environment professionals, and we put a lot of energy into saving money. Lo and behold, we own that infrastructure for the next 40, 50 years. The life cycle cost, input costs from those practitioners is as little as 2% over the entire life. What we miss is, okay, you can optimize in the construction process, that's another 15, 20%, so that's 22%. The 78% is in the operation and maintenance. It's a massive iceberg. And we don't put enough innovation at the front end that will save us money in the long run when we're owning and operating this infrastructure, simply because we are not developing a full life cycle view. I often use at conferences the best analogy that comes closest to home for people to appreciate is, would you ever walk into a computer shop and they're selling printers very cheap, HP. It's the best trick they pulled in them. Buy an HP printer, it'll cost you 1,500 rand. You go and look at what the cost of those cartridges are. You will be paying for that printer several times over because the consumption and the cost of the cartridges by far outweighs that. And that's the life cycle ownership perspective we need to have in our infrastructure thinking and our consideration.
No, that's true.
Yeah, but Chris, not only economical, even the environmental impact.
Absolutely.
You know, we get fixated saying reduce emissions during construction. That is minimal compared to a bad design in its operation.
Yeah. In fact, if I may add there, and I think, Lisa, you'll like this, one often looks at green buildings, lots of glass, lots of natural light. Guess what? The guys who do the aircon work are smiling because you're going to need to cool that building more. So you think you've won on the swings, but you're losing on the roundabout. So, you know, one needs to have a more holistic view on that pursuit.
We have another question there.
Good afternoon. My name is Cleo Mahahane. My question, I think, is a collective question. What I want to ask is, what are the learnings that, as a collective, that you can recommend for low cost to affordable housing in terms of digital technologies? Like, what if you were to recommend digital technology for effective construction of low cost to affordable housing, which would it be and why?
Let's start with Lisa on this one.
Yeah, that's a nice, difficult one. Thank you. I think every project will have its own learnings, but I think what I object to is that you start every project from scratch. And I think the kind of learnings that we've learned along the way is one, to get and I think somebody else said it, to get the people on the ground involved in the beginning. I said that that's where the biggest difference comes in, is where the local people, and especially people who are going to use those facilities or the houses, get them involved so they understand this is why I'm doing this and what I'm getting. And as the other thing is maintenance of different things, where you've had, say you've tried a new technology and it didn't quite work for some reasons, where you've had failings, those are also learnings. But you don't want to just repeat them. And Bongani said, you must be happy to fail, but not happy to fail 100 times. So it's those kind of things, is establish what worked, get the people involved, and you take that to the next project. And I think that's where you go from one to the next. And as I said, the biggest things I've learned is really getting the community involved and then training them in the different aspects.
Community participation.
That's it. It's huge.
Chris?
So I like the question of digital technology. If we let's just take the example of a rural residential development, several houses in a village. One has to wonder, why are we not looking at the opportunities for those communities to self-generate electricity? It's not an invisible thing anymore. You can use the digital technology that, from the solar panel generation, have the monitoring system that shows how much energy, and each household then develops and derives a benefit from that by having access to electricity, self-generated. And then the surplus, much like the mines are doing it on scale. Here you can look at it at a small scale and pool and create power pools where you can then be selling and trading. So you create both income for those communities and electricity, and you solve at least one part of the kind of problems that many people in rural environments still are saddled with. We very successfully rolled out telecom cabling. I mean, there was telecom phones just about everywhere. I mean, they ran the lines there. Why can't you do that with the fiber lines? Because I think that your fiber technologies are going to overtake the mobile. Although I must say that if you travel into other parts of our continent, and you can go as rural as possible, you'll see people's houses are painted blue, or they're painted yellow, or they're painted red. That's like a Vodacom MTN competition there. And people have access to mobile technology, so you can use that, even link that, and use that digital technology to manage those systems that make those communities self-sustaining.
Bongani?
Yeah, I think in design, it's going to become more and more important to have our communities connected. So, you've seen in suburbs how it happens when they are trying to deal with fiber lines. They've destroyed a lot of our walkways, our roads, and all that after the fact. So I think in low-cost housing, new housing developments, as much as you are thinking about water, sewer, stormwater, you need to also be thinking before you construct your roads about data cablings and all that. It must not be after the fact. I think that's going to become more important because connectivity is sort of, in some parts of the world, are saying it's a basic human right, but it's sort of becoming more and more important. So in design and planning, I think that's going to become central. It's going to become a norm going forward. Yes, renewable energy, definitely, I think it's becoming important. But we need to, that's one that I think planners and engineers need to be looking at now, because someone is going to come up with a standard for that or best practice around that very soon, because it's just becoming too obvious. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. Do you have
Sorry,
a last
can I
comment?
add something?
to make?
Yeah, sorry. Just a comment, and I think really to add to your point as well. I think one of the very important things, and Bongani, you spoke about basically, and you also spoke, Chris, about life cycle, is it's also about future-proofing what you're doing. So whether you're looking at infrastructure, buildings, whatever, if you think of KZN, we used to talk about 50-year, 100-year floodplains. They're not 50-year, 100 years anymore. We have to, when we look at planning, when we look at designing infrastructure, when we look at what we're putting in, we must understand the future that we're going into. Because and even when we're talking about refurbishing KZN's infrastructure, again, it's no good refurbishing it with what we had if it's going to happen often. And I think that also goes into this conversation where to buy cheaply, your initial capex, as you say, it's nothing compared to that operation of the area, but it's also nothing compared if you don't consider, climate we talk about mitigating climate change, and I think we're beyond that. We now have to talk about adaptation of to climate change. And that's where these conversations also have to be in saying, guys, how do we future-proof what we're building, from infrastructure to housing to whatever we're doing, because what we knew before is no longer adequate.
Any final questions, burning questions from the audience? I'm not seeing any questions coming through. So maybe just...
sorry.
Do you have one?
Yeah, I just have a question for Lisa. Okay. Given your background in energy, are there best practices or best practice case studies from a developing country perspective of how to manage the tension between responsible, honoring environmental commitments, especially climate commitments, but also addressing energy access? I think there's this tension that's there when it comes to sustainable infrastructure between ensuring energy security, but also maintaining responsible management of resources. So from a construction perspective, around the world, not only in Africa, but elsewhere, are there some best case studies that South Africa can draw from with regards to that?
Absolutely, and I think, just so for the record, I call myself a pragmatic tree hugger. So it means I live in reality, but I do believe in a sort of low carbon future and things like that. And if you look at a lot of European countries, if you look at Germany with solar power and things like that, they've got less sun than we do, and yet they've sort of managed to have a whole system going where the houses generate and they can feed back into the grid and things like that. And again, I'm not saying that we must do those kind of things overnight, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned. I've spoken to a few cities, when we look at sort of affordable housing, is that we don't have to put a solar panel on each house, but you can put a centralized sort of solar generator within that space, and actually, localize where your energy is generated and put in there. Because there's a lot of those examples overseas where it's sort of less centralized. I've had conversations with Eskom saying that you're in the electricity selling business, not in the coal-fired power electricity selling business. So there's a lot of solutions you can do. We came, just in Africa, just an example, we came across a school that needed water pumped from the ground, and they'd actually connected the children's roundabout at the school, the little game that they play, the thing that goes round, to the water pump. And as they played, they pumped their own water out the ground. We spoke about this overseas, and they said it wouldn't fly overseas because it equals child labor to them. So it's like, this, we thought it was a great idea. And overseas, they're like, oh, you're using children to pump water, So, but there's examples in Africa, there's examples overseas, and we can bring them in. And as I say, I am one that believes in transition. We talk about transitions. And that's the thing we have to do. We speak about 5 years transition, 10 years transition, how to get to a place. And there's plenty of examples of how to do this better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe just as final remarks from all our panelists, maybe you can just highlight, key collaborative efforts that could elevate the level of growth in digital technologies, innovation, and construction. What do you think? If you can give me one or two nice concluding remarks for the session. Who want to start? I'm not going to put anyone under pressure. Yeah, okay.
So, it was a very interesting question. I attended a session last week, and we talked growth. And here we want to grow in digital technologies, but we can grow all of that, but we need money for that. So we need to grow our economy. And one of the key strategies for growing an economy is to strengthen your research base in your country. Put more money into a research that's being done at universities and those institutions that can feed into the ideas pool that we want to for which areas do we focus on, which do we build on more, and which do we do less. And we can probably then, with that research and that information, find the linkages and the right levers, because you can put a lot of energy in the wrong place for a long time and not see the results. And the only way to overcome that problem is to build intelligence in your system, but it has to be research-based. And that's where I think it's going to be key that we collaborate on building strong information systems that have integrity. As we speak currently, that almost sounds like pie in the sky, because you can go to any local government office, and the infrastructure that you want to develop for the future is dependent on what you have currently. There's no records. The information is missing, it's gone. So we need to find a way of building that so that we can build for the future. So, I think that kind of collaboration is going to be crucial.
Government digitization of the records.
Prof likes that. Yeah. Prof likes it a lot, yeah.
Bongani?
Yeah, I think we also need to sort of open up our blinkers a bit and have a far more multidisciplinary approach to things. Yes, universities, I think, as you've noted, are very important partners in this, but they will work and stop at a point to move on to the next project. But then you need to link them up with entrepreneurs that will be able to commercialize and take it forward. And then you also need to match it with a supportive environment for those entrepreneurs where we will be able to procure for it. So we need a far more collaborative, open approach to dealing with some of these new solutions. You see, even with water technology, sometimes the frustration that people will come in with to say, but this thing is just not being accepted. We have a brilliant product, but we are not moving. So I think we need more spaces like that, and in a forum like this also, in terms of SIDSSA, also, and the work that they do can also accelerate that particular aspect, because we are looking at inclusive growth also through partnership. So we need to really be open with that, and then, yeah. I think that could contribute positively.
Thank you. Unfortunately, you didn't get a clap from the Prof, but
Yeah.
it's appreciated.
We are together with the Prof. We both believe the
Yeah.
role. Yeah.
I think what I said before is stakeholder engagement. I think it's very, very important. And I think, we talk about collecting data, but often you find people don't want to share data. I think we must also get to a place where people collaborate and say, this is for the good, the better good. So it's not about business, it's not about keeping your data close to your chest and thinking, it's got a value. It's really about saying, can't we share this to get a better picture and a bigger picture? I think that's quite vital. The last thing I want to say is, too often we find a technology and somebody will say, this will solve all problems, but you have to look at this in where is it fitting? What is the holistic picture? Because too often I've seen things fail because it only fix one thing and then they haven't looked at the knock-on effects. I think it's also having a more holistic approach to everything.
Thank you, panelists. Bongani, Chris, Lisa, for your contributions. Having a holistic approach, doing some more research, finding the gap in essence of that research, and trying to see where the partnerships actually are. There's a lot that still needs to be done in the sector, and a lot of pilots that we still probably need to do as well. But hopefully it's not going to take us 25 years to do it. It needs to take us much shorter than the 25 years that you mentioned. But thank you very much for your contributions. It was much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Thank you.
That concludes the end of the symposium. Thank you so much for joining us for this breakout session. There's some goodies for you, our panelists. Just wanted to announce that there is a networking cocktail taking place at the V&A waterfront, the Lookout. There is transportation available at the energy lane outside if you would like to join us. So thank you. Thank you very much.